This second meeting of the Committee of the Whole to discuss the 2012 to 13 Cuyahoga County biennial budget will please come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Brady. Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Mr. Jones. Mr. Rogers. Ms. Simon. Here. Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Ms. Conley.
Here.
Quorum.
Thank you very much. And regarding the minutes, the plan is that we're going to approve minutes once weekly. So when we come back next Monday, we will hopefully approve the minutes for yesterday's sessions and today's session, so we don't have that on the agenda. The next thing would be the question of whether anybody has signed in for public comment related to the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, no one has signed in to speak.
Okay, we'll go on to item number 4, and the clerk will please read the resolution.
Resolution number 2011-0291, a resolution adopting the 2012-2013 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Thank you very much. Director Steen is asked to make a few comments regarding health care before we start today's session, and I now recognize him to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I just wanted to share that as we constructed the budget in each department, there is a personal benefits line. That was calculated off the number of employees we knew they had at the mid-year and the type of coverage, if they have family or single coverage. It's a calculation made by OBM. That calculation will be changed once we have new rates and we know exactly how many people are covered. But I know some of the directors and departments were concerned because they were trying to match up their number and were wondering what they had to share about that. They really have no control over that number. Once the rates are set, we budget for all their employees at the coverages that they have. It's merely the premium. And so I wanted to share that with the committee because I know some of the directors yesterday were concerned about that line item, and they have no control over that line item. That's merely plugged by OBM based upon the number of employees they have and the coverages that they choose to take.
Thank you very much. I would note that Councilman Jones has joined the meeting, and we will now call the first department forward, which is the County Executive's Office. And to present that budget is the County Executive's Chief of Staff, Matt Carroll. Mr. Carroll.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of Council. Just have really brief remarks. Be happy to answer your questions about the County Executive's Office budget. In the budget book, you see the projected amount for 2011 and a recommended amount. I think the major reason for the difference between the two is a lack of 12-month spending for the employees that are currently in the Executive's Office, and the 2012 represents full 12 months for the people that will be there. You see a difference between the FTE levels for this year and recommended for next year. That number reflects what the county executive said the other day about the communications office being separated off, and that's those employees will be part of their own area with other communications people as well. To give you just a breakdown of who the 12 people are, I think that might be helpful to you. We have the county executive and myself. We have the 4 special assistants, one of whom is vacant, Bob Ivory's position, but that's David Merriman, Justin Bibb, and Jim Boyle. We also have pretty much the other staff. We have Sharon Cole, who is one of our deputy chiefs, who's in this county executive's budget. And then the remaining staff members are administrative support members in the area, including Juanita Jeter and Tanya Harrison, Laura Roche, and Jane Wagner. And I think I didn't miss anyone. And Essie Allen as well. Can't forget Essie. Those are the 12 that are proposed to be in the county executive's office budget next year. And again, I believe the 2012 recommended number has the FTE number there, but it hasn't eliminated the 2 salaries for the communication staff yet. So that is to be adjusted. I expect there'll be probably other adjustments as well. I think the health care and other benefits, that amount within that amount is going to be adjusted as well. To give you an idea of where that 1.7 million, what goes into it, again, those 12 staff people and their benefits, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.1 million. Then we have a variety of other things, some of which are controlled services, a little under 200,000, which is for space maintenance and data and computer support. We have a couple of contracts for our advocates in Columbus and Washington. That's within this section as well. And then finally, we have a variety of other expenses, including, of course, office expenses. We charge $12,000 for the fellowship program, the stipends for fellows that we had in the county executive's office this year, and then some other varied costs as well, other supplies, some software is listed here, and I'm trying to think if I missed anything. That is pretty much where you get to the total that's listed in the book. That is really, I wanted to detail what the budget included and what the staff that were part of it. It's pretty much the extent of the remarks I plan to give for the executive's office. I'd be happy to answer questions that you have or provide more information.
Mr. Carroll, where are the deputy chiefs of staff funded in the budget?
Mr. Chairman, the other three deputy chiefs are within their clusters where they operate. So Noberto Colon is in the area, in the justice area, Nate Kelly is in the development area, and Joe Gauntner is in the human services area. So they're assigned more to their the areas where they work.
Okay. We note that Councilman Brady has joined us, and we all know about the mess on the West Shoreway, which detained people a little bit. I now ask if there's any questions by any of my colleagues regarding the county executive's budget. Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. The department, the communications area that you spoke of earlier, I don't see them having a budget appropriation. Where are they now?
They are, there won't be any new hires for that area. There will be people from other parts of the county who will be joined together. So I don't think they've been placed as a marker in the book yet, but that'll be developing.
And where is Nicole Daly Jones if she's not in year 12?
She will be in that area.
But where is she now?
As far as the budget book goes, I'm not absolutely sure. I mean, she's in the total FTE count or personnel count, but I don't know exactly where, which section she's in. Wade, do you?
I'm sorry, I was trying to get Sybil's attention to answer your question. Would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just curious where the current communications department with the 2 FTEs with Nicole and Daly Jones and Mr. Colstrand, where they're currently budgeted if they're not in the executive's budget.
Hi, Sybil Haney, Office of Budget Management. Through the chairperson to Councilperson Greenspan. The actual FTE numbers, they're in limbo. The salary amounts, the payroll, the expenses are in the executive's budget.
Oh. Okay.
So yeah, their salaries are still in our 2012 number.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Council.
We will now move on to item number 2, which is the County Council's budget, and to present that is our Chief of Staff, Mr. Joe Nani.
Good morning. Excuse me. Before I begin discussing the 2012-13 budget, I wanted to provide you with an update of the current 2011. We're currently projecting a slight surplus to finish the year, equal to about $50,000. The majority of the surplus comes from 2 areas, the first being savings in health benefits from our employees this year that didn't start receiving benefits until after the 120-day waiting period. The other area of savings comes from less than expected expenditures in postage, printing costs, and other than what was in the original budget. Our projected total year expenditures for 2011 is $1.4 million. Our 2012-2013 budget is roughly in the area of $1.96 million each year, respectively. Just want to draw your attention to a couple of areas where there's new expenses in the budget for 2012 and 13. The addition of 2 new employees, 1 employee to assist the clerk of council in preparing and clerking committee meetings, among other duties. The second employee will be a receptionist for the office to handle all the front desk and administrative functions of the office. This will allow the clerk of council to have a dedicated staff person and allow George and Khalil more focus on policy and constituent services. The total estimated salary and benefits for these 2 employees is not to exceed $113,000. Special projects is another new category. This could include any consulting or professional service contracts that might be necessary throughout the year for council. If any of these types of services would be needed, of course they'd be procured through an RFP process. The total provided for in the budget for these special projects is not to exceed $100,000. Then we have $50,000 for community outreach and events efforts are also included. This would allow us to more effectively communicate to the citizens. When we recently attended that meeting at the fairgrounds, one of the things that was mentioned was were the residents who were actually looking for handouts and things about the county in general. This amount would allow us to get items printed, distributed to the public on an as-needed basis. In addition to these items above, the remaining budget includes salary and benefits for staff and for council members, and that's at $1.4 million. County print shop and postage charges at $66,000, and space maintenance charges at $254,000. Finally, just want to let you know, Gene has been working with the County Information Services Center to codify our ordinances in an organized and easily searchable manner. It's important to note that Jeff Mowry and his team have indicated that they're able to do this in staff and internally. And this was an expense that we thought we would have to incur in 2012, but we were able to save significantly by using the internal resources for this project. And just as a side note, I wanted to, as the committee meeting was happening yesterday, I have the ability to check the live stream of who's actually watching these meetings, and it's important to note we had about average of 40 people watching the committee meeting yesterday. It obviously increases when our regular council meetings are on, but it does show that the public is accessing government in a much different way. So I want to continue focusing on how to improve that and let more people know about that, as well as work on other ways for the public to actually see how their government is working. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, we certainly would like to welcome all those who are watching on the live streaming this morning, and I recognize that Councilwoman Conwell has joined the meeting. And for comments further about the council's budget, I recognize Council President Conley.
Just as an aside, Mr. Nani, do you want to report the numbers of people that have been watching our council meetings?
I'm preparing a report for you guys that actually lists each of the individual Tuesday meetings as well as the committee meetings. It's very easy to do with some software that we have, free software from Google that we have. But I think it averages for council meetings, depending on what's going on, but anywhere between 60 and 100 people.
And I know we had an opportunity you were able to ascertain where people are watching the meetings. So we had like people from out of state. And
yes, it's intriguing to see, depending on what's on the agenda. One example, if there's something of more wider interest, you see a lot of hits out of Columbus taking place, and people watching in these meetings and things along those lines. So it's very interesting to see where people are coming from.
But I wanted to just point out to all of the persons on council that I did send you a more detailed budget over the weekend by email that I'm sure that you had an opportunity to look at, and I got a couple of phone calls from people asking about specific items. But the more specific budget has been submitted to all of you.
Okay.
I think
Are there other Questions?
Yes.
Ms. Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Nani. The postage that we have set forth for the 2011 and 12 budget, is there sufficient budget for a newsletter that the county council is looking to disseminate to its residents?
For the 2011 budget, you had indicated 2012. For
Well,
our
both.
current budget
Both.
this year. Okay, for this year?
Oh, I'm sorry, no,
no.
okay, no
Yeah.
for this year, 12?
For 12, it depends on the size of a mailing that we'd want to do. If it was a mailing to all the districts, to all of the households, or to all the, I guess, to the list we would receive probably from the Board of Elections registered households. I think in the area of 190,000 would be the total cost of a mailing along those lines. So the answer is no, we don't have that fully in our budget. We do have money for next year identified to do mailings, but probably not to do one large mailing of that size.
Well, I want to look to our budget to see where we can,
Identify.
to accommodate that type of mailing for
Okay.
2012 to reach our residents, especially senior citizens who don't have computer access, other people who are going to be in need with the economy as it is, with the recession, who are going to be looking to us to educate them on what services are provided by the county, to make sure they have access to these services. That's, I think, vital to represent our residents. So I'd like to see that we look to accommodate that mailing.
I can provide information on how much that would cost, as well as kind of some ideas on where we might be able to get that.
Mr. Miller? I might point out also that Mr. Nani and I have been working on, when we have the council meeting, when we record them, there are a lot of the public access stations that will play these in their off times or when they have an available space for public programming. So we will be having those council meetings played on the various local access cable stations, which provide additional amount of information for those who don't have computer access.
Yeah, I'm working on getting a list of the municipalities that have that, and just getting in a situation where we can either email, link in, or send them a DVD, so these meetings can be broadcast on their regular rotation. From what I understand, there are a lot of, especially, all of the communities are looking for content, government content, where we can share this.
Yeah, they used to play the court proceedings a lot on the Cleveland channel, so
Yes.
I'm sure we'll get a lot of coverage on that.
Ms. Conwell?
The chair to Mr. Nani. I kind of agree with Sonny. I think we need some newsletters, and so I just want to be clear. I know the postage is a big issue and mailing them out, but there's other ways. So we are going to still print a newsletter, correct?
Yes, actually, it's important to note, since you're asking, the newsletter is complete. There's a couple of you folks that were looking for content for the individual councilperson's page, and we'd be happy to help you with that if you need us to help with. So it was built in a format that can be both printed as well as emailed. So we can do both. We can do however it is that you want it done. We anticipated that.
Well, I just want to know what the consensus was. I think the email is great, but everybody doesn't access the email. And I know I've talked to several of the CDCs in my district and how they get theirs out. They don't mail them all out. You know, they're willing for my district, and maybe others can ask, you know, to assimilate our newsletter along with theirs, so where they put it,
Yes.
the library and places like that. So
We're able to do that as well. That's another way to get it out there, is to give it to some of the community groups. We can print. The print shop is wonderful. We just need them to tell them what it is that we want, and they'll be able to accommodate us, both in doing the printing as well as if we need to do a mailing. They're very good at assisting with that.
I think there's a consensus that newsletters are going to be both printed and emailed. The question that's not yet resolved is about the extent of mailing and sending out and paying for postage. Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Joe Nani, The other operating expense, the county garage, could you just go into that a little bit? The 2012 budget says that we're gonna allow $3,000. What is that $3,000 for? That's on page 2.
Yes, I believe the county garage expense
I'm looking
is.
at my I'm looking at this sheet.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry. That is if we use a car, like if we need to borrow a pool car from the county to drive to Columbus or something like that, that's an expense that's in there, so we have access to those vehicles. We have not used that yet, but it's in there if we need it.
So if we don't use it, through the chair to Mr. Nani, so if we don't use it, what happens? That money just rolls over to the next year for
Usually we just
possible
start.
usage?
I don't know if the term is rolls over, it's just goes into the next year. Yeah, we end with a surplus. That would be included in the surplus category.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment about the newsletter. Is what we anticipate is printing out probably about 2,500 to 3,000 per council person or more if they want more. And then the council person can arrange to take them to libraries, senior citizens' homes, CDCs, whatever you want. And if you want more, then we can print more. But I think that that would save us significantly on the postage and make those available in public buildings. And we've actually talked to, I think Department of Human Services is willing to participate in some of the various departments in getting those out. I just want to go for the record. I just cannot vote for $190,000 for postage to mail it out. It's just too much money. And I mean, it would be wonderful, but I, for one, just can't vote for that.
Through the chair to Madam President, I know the suggestion is the Cleveland Public Library, Director Felton, they have this system where you give them the information, they'll assimilate to all their Cleveland Public Libraries. And I'm sure that we can contact the county libraries as well, set up that sort of program. So it's, because they do it already.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Conwell?
Mr. Chair?
Then,
Comment. I'd like to see some money for mailing these newsletters, and it's our very function as council people to reach out to our residents, especially after the first year of being in office, to educate what we've been doing. And I can tell you that we put a lot into IT over the past 9-10 months, and I think for a one-time newsletter to let the residents know everything that's been going on, to encapsulate and to communicate. That's the very function. Other than our budget, it's to communicate with residents. And I'm going to tell you that the IT is not reaching the residents as many as we need to. So that's my position. I think we need to do at least a partial mailing, a one time with the new government. And I think this is our very function to communicate. And we can't do it all by IT.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Nani, the $190,000, how many residents does that reach? What is the mailing number of people?
Remember the number? 620,000.
So is that the entire county or a portion?
So that's the list from the registered voters. So we do to household, not to each voter, but to each household.
I have to agree with Councilwoman Simon that I think it is critical. There are seniors that we represent that are not using IT. And as we see, our rooms are not full of the community. They're looking to us to reach out to them, whether that's attending a meeting, placing it on email, on the internet, or actually reaching out to them in the form of a newsletter. The Plain Dealer is here representing the people, and they send a paper to the residents who actually pay for it. But I do think it's a part of our responsibility to reach out in the form of a paper, of a newsletter. Now, the 190 is a considerable amount, but I think there's room to maybe adjust that. And I think more dialogue should be had around that subject. If 190 is too high, how do we address that? Do residents call in and say, we want a paper? When a resident asks us for something, we respond to them. So I do think there's more room for dialogue, and it doesn't have to just be 190 or not. Maybe there's some give and take in there. But I do think it's it's important to reach out to them in that way.
Okay, any other comments?
Chair. Mr. Chair, to Mr. Nani, I was interested, I thought the outreach budget was a little low. Is there any room for that to grow? I know each council member has they have different demographics and different ways that they reach out to their people. So I believe it was 50,000, I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any way for that to grow a little bit? So I'm just thinking of 50,000, just 10 of us, that's only 5,000 if you needed some, so I'm
Well,
not quite sure
keep in
what-
mind that item is flexible in terms of what we can do, and I was anticipating that would be something along the lines of getting things printed and more print charges. We do have a separate category for postage and mailings, so it's not restricted. It's kind of left open to see how and the different things we can do. We did that one kind of what I thought was a nice piece, just two-sided, very informative. These are your council people, these are the districts. We did that very briefly, very quickly, through the print shop. So I was thinking of things along those lines that we could do for the full council to inform the citizens of appropriate contact numbers, website, things along those lines. I don't think that's a low number, but I'd like to get your ideas more, maybe what you mean in terms of if you have specific ideas for that outreach.
Yeah, so through the chair to Mr. Nani, so if you have a district that, wants to put on events and get some flyers out and things of that nature, is that going to come out the community outreach budget, or is that going to come out the printing, or the copying, or the Xeroxing, whatever the case may be?
It really depends on what the request is, I would say, but we were trying to do more global council things. The newsletter, as you saw, had the individual page. The content of most of the newsletter was for the full council, and then there was one page to kind of explain what's happening in the individual district. So again, we can talk more about what it is that your specific areas of interest are.
Ms. Simon?
Mr. Chair, one more thing I want this council to keep in mind is that this budget came at least from the executive. This is the executives, am I correct? A lot of it, or no?
No.
No, this is from us. Okay.
Correct.
But I do want to point out the executive's one body, it's one department that has, for a year, 2 communications people outreaching big time every day, every single day. Council has had nothing other than what we individually have been able to do. So I don't think it's unjustified for one time to do a mailing to reach residents. That's the point. It's disproportionate to having 11 people reaching out to their districts. So I just want to also point that out, as we have not had a communication outreach person for 11 people versus 2. And I'm not begrudging the executive for having his team. I think it's wise and it's necessary.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Germano?
You mentioned that this was going to go to voting households. Are we missing non-voting households? And what would that number be?
That number would be significantly higher. The only reason why we used that number is to forecast a cost. It's the easiest way that we could identify how to get mailing addresses, and it's very easy to do that. But you could see that the cost would be quite a bit higher if you went to all households. I don't know what that would be, but it would be higher.
Mr. Chairman, just my point of view, we represent all citizens of Cuyahoga County, and I think if we just send it out to voting households, we could be held up to criticism of franking privileges or something such as that. So I think if we're going to be talking about mailing, we should be talking about all citizens, all households.
Mr. Schran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just seems to me that the question is not mailing as much as it is communication, and what is the desired communication technique that we think And perhaps we should throw it back on staff and say, what other kind of techniques, because there's obviously inserts in newspapers that's much lower cost than a mailing. There's the library system. So if it's communication that we're talking about, I think we should circle the wagons around what is it that we want to try and do, identify how often we want that to take place, and what are the techniques that we want to use. And it seems to me that really is the number. And I would agree with my colleague that when we start talking about county services, we don't mean county services just for voters. We mean county services, period, irrespective of whether you vote or don't vote. And so I think that any solution needs to be inclusive if we're going to do it, and find out what are the different access points. And I think that a lot of our senior citizens do access the library system. And I know I see them picking up things at the county library as a very active role. And so that's one way in which it's out there. I know that in my community, we have newsletters that come out very actively from various, each one of the villages or the municipalities, and perhaps there's a way we can actually bundle ours with theirs at a lower bulk rate cost. So it seems that if it's communication we want to try and do, one size probably doesn't fit all, and we probably need to figure out what the different tools and techniques need to be, and then come back and build a budget off of that, as opposed to try and say what should be the number, and then let's divide the number up amongst our colleagues.
I agree. And to restate, the way we designed it, it's very flexible in terms of how it could be done. We can either share articles with people in the community that are doing a newsletter on their own. Some people like that. We can email it, we can print it, and we can mail it. All of those things, the way it currently is, we're able to do those. And so we can take a look at additional ideas in terms of how to get it out there, and come back with you with a proposal.
And I would also expect that we probably could even get reprints within the news editions that go out from perhaps Euclid. I know Euclid has one. I know that Highland Heights has one. I know that Independence and Brecksville and all those have communications vehicles. They might be willing to give us a county corner within those, and republish what we already have going out in some of those areas.
Just a final note, if I may. That's fine. I think we should just look at what else is available. But I do want to point out that even though these, and I'm just going to mention these applications for by mail voting, because every avenue has been reached except going off, other than sending a mailing, and the response has been 2/3 less than it was by this time last year. So even though the newspaper's been printing it, even though they're all over the library, all of that's been happening, and we're still missing out on 2/3 of the people who would have sent in their applications. So there's something missing when you take away by mail. That's something that's just standard, expected. So I don't mind looking at a mixture of things, but I don't think we can, diminish the importance of mailing.
To my mind, the challenge is to try to find ways to get the communications to the people who want them, whether they're voters or not voters, but not to spend money sending newsletters to people who are going to regard them as junk mail and just pitch them. And I think that's part of what the challenge is. Any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll move on to a very large area of county government, which is an area that has been much reorganized under the new system of government, and that is the fiscal office. To present that is Director Wade Steen.
Mr. Chairman and council members, thank you for the chance to be here today to talk about our budget. And it's not on my prepared comments, but since you just had the discussion on mailing, I would offer that now that Cuyahoga County is a consolidated government, one enterprise, there is one office that mails to every household, voter or not, twice a year. And that would be if there's a way to incorporate something that you'd like to do into the tax bill. Those that are part of the Board of Control know that we've already bid out this year's tax billing, but I want to go back to the comment that they might consider it junk mail. I hope they wouldn't throw the tax bill away along with the other information.
Certainly always a happy time in every
But,
household in the county.
But,
When I use that.
but by law, we must mail to the households, and we wouldn't be mailing to mortgage companies because they get them on tape. So some homes who have a mortgage wouldn't get this, but it's a thought where county government, council, fiscal office, and executive can work together. We're already doing that mailing. We'd love to talk with your staff if that's something you'd like us to do. As far as the fiscal office, on your agenda, you'll see under fiscal office, auditor, recorder, procurement, diversity, budget management, capital improvement, debt service, and the county budget commission. The way we're going to present to you today, I want to give you some highlights and talk about our reorganization. Mark Parks is going to walk through the detailed budget for the fiscal office, except for Treasury. County Treasurer Rich Sensenbrenner will talk about the Treasury function, and then Marty Murphy will be talking about the Board of Revision. So we've kind of rolled it all together because that's how we're organized now. We don't really have auditor recorder. We have one large entity. As a backdrop, staff in the fiscal office numbered 485. That included 20 BOR members early in 2011. So if you net that out, it was about 465 members. The chart that you see shows 428 members. 42 of those are Board of Revision employees that have been added to work with the backlog, which brings us to a net 386. You'll see in your book the number 383. The difference between the two is that inside the detail of the budget, that's a calculated FTE number. One of the challenges we're still wrestling with is that the fiscal office inherited employees, some who work a 40-hour week and some who work a 35-hour week. So to calculate an FTE number on a group of people who work different schedules was a little challenging, and we're working through that. In front of you is what the fiscal office looks like now. There is no auditor. There is no recorder. There is a treasurer that oversees the treasury management function. But this is the organizational structure that I've crafted with the help of senior management to make the fiscal office as efficient as we can and perform all the functions as required by statute. And so I leave that in front of you as we go through. The budget you see today will flow with this organizational chart. A couple of highlights, if I could. Right now, the fiscal office is evaluating a more effective method of processing tax payments through a lockbox system. The lockbox is being evaluated. We anticipate a live test run December 1. The process should reduce processing costs by approximately $200,000. And I know Treasurer Sensenbrenner will talk with you about that. He's been leading that charge. The fiscal office is in the process of trying to bring to closure a potential tax lien sale scheduled for October 28th. It would bring the county between $40 and $50 million in delinquent taxes. And I am under the impression that there'll be some questions about where we stand with that and how we move forward. The fiscal office, in collaboration with County Councilmember Sonny Simon, is beginning an initiative to educate county residents on the importance of having dogs licensed. The program is called Top Dog. The contest entails elementary children writing essays about why their dog is the top dog. The end result, though, is to educate residents on the importance of licensing your dog and pet ownership. But more importantly, if we can increase dog license registration just 10,000 dogs, which is very reasonable because we're about 30,000, 25 to 30,000 behind Franklin County, that would bring the county $180,000, which would then go to help fund the animal shelter. The sexennial reappraisal is projected to be 56% complete by year end. At this point, as we stand here today at the end of September, we were about 20% complete in terms of looking at parcels in the county. A couple other things to note. Inside your book, you'll notice the number 344. We anticipate about additional 42 reductions in staff in next year going into 2013. And I always hesitate because I know that the staff that work in the fiscal office, this causes them great stress and concern when they hear those statements. But it is in the book. It is what we believe we'll get to when we get the department right-sized. We have a meeting with the accounting firm Deloitte & Touche this week to hopefully complete the 2009 audit, which is still lingering. At least once per week, the fiscal office, and primarily the fiscal officer, participates in labor negotiations with the executive's office. And thus far, I think we've had reasonable success. You have been part of the executive sessions where you know how we're progressing, and I think we're making good progress on those. The last big item is that OBM, upon the completion of all these hearings and any modifications that are brought forward through the council hearing process, OBM will be finalizing the budget document, getting it out to the public, getting it on the website, and getting it loaded into the system so that we can start activity for next year, for 2012 and on into 2013. So that'll be a big activity that happens within the next couple months. With that, I'd like to invite Mark Parks up to go through the consolidated budget that's inside the budget book. Well, actually, let me stop before you come up, Mark. Are there any questions for me about the reorganization or anything that I stated in just my general opening comments before we get into the detail?
Chairman.
Councilman Brady.
Just very briefly, where do I find state tax and weights and measures?
The state tax and weights and measures would be down under where it says records and licensing, that group of employees there. They fall under, that's considered more of the operations. I guess in general, operations is what touches the public. Financial reporting is our accounting area, and it says controller. We don't have a controller. We have a director of financial reporting. We're reworking the job title and description so that it would be a controller. That's what you would see in the corporate world as a controller. OBM is relatively unchanged. Treasury management and collection right now is the former treasury function, but we've also moved anyone collecting cash into that area. You had cash collectors throughout the county. They're now part of Treasurer Sensenbrenner's responsibility. Office of Procurement and Diversity is unchanged. Special projects was newly created, and the reason for that is as we go through consolidation, one of the big tasks is going to be bringing together disparate information systems, employees on different work weeks. We needed someone that owned that process, and so that group right there will help us in this consolidation over the next 2 years. Board of Revision, you're well familiar with. They're fully staffed at 42 employees. And the Audit Committee, which I sit on along with Council President Conley, we've put in a budget for the internal audit function. At this point, as a quick update, we interviewed candidates last week. We do have a finalist, and we're going to be working with HR to coordinate the offer letter, background check, drug test, things of that nature. And if the person does accept the offer, then they would start to build that department. We hope to have them at least in place by the end of the year. And so we'll be working on that. The finalist is from out of town. The two finalists, actually, the top two candidates were both from out of town. So we're making an offer to see if they'll accept and come to Cuyahoga County and take over that function. So there's a budget for that, but there are no employees in that area at this point.
Are you done?
I'm sorry.
That was a
Okay.
long
Councilman
answer.
Trump.
Long answer to your question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sheen, in the 42 employees in the Board of Revision, how many panels does that include, and does that include the blue ribbon panel that people have talked about?
It includes 7 panels of 21, and it does not include the blue ribbon panel because they would not be paid. They would be doing that pro bono. These are the paid employees, the 21 hearing officers and then the 21 support staff.
Okay, so it's not envisioned that that panel would be a compensated panel at all?
At this point, the suggestion was that they be compensated for expenses, lunch and parking, but there was also the question, does that impair your independence if you accept any compensation? So we're trying to work through that right now to just find out if we can offer them that.
Do you know what the status of that is?
I do not know the status directly. I will find out by this afternoon, council member.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two related, I hate when I do that. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to tell you how many questions I have because I always lead to more. Have we formalized your department yet? Office of Budget Management and Procurement Diversity, have we formally moved them under the fiscal office? As we, it's our responsibility to create departments and divisions. Have we I don't recall if we've done that.
To the councilman through the chair, I don't think this has been formalized. Earlier you heard from the chief of staff. I'm going to get back to your question talking about moving employees to a communications department. The reason they're still budgeted in the executive's budget is a communications department has not been created through this body. So the direct answer is I do not believe all of the departments listed have been created. Some are called for in the charter that report to or function under the fiscal officer. But yes, at some point the HRC and this body, I would ask to look at this and approve this so we can move forward in this functioning manner, in this organizational structure.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may recommend that we start that process sooner than later so that we're able to properly fund these departments under this structure in such a way. Because right now, I don't believe that the decision can be solely through the executive to form this in this way. The other issue has to do with Treasury by charter. I think we're going to need a charter amendment to move the treasurer under the fiscal officer. Because right now, the charter does not delineate that as being a department or division of the fiscal officer. It almost, as I would interpret it, to be a cabinet level position. I don't like that term, but to the executive directly. Although I agree with the structure, I don't disagree with this. I'm saying to move it forward, my two recommendations would be formally constitute the fiscal office as you have it here. One of these items will probably need to be a charter amendment. And that's my only comment on this item.
To the council member, through the chair, if I can, we did check with our legal department, and the charter speaks to the position of county treasurer. There shall be a position of county treasurer. It doesn't speak to who they report to, and the county executive made the decision that county treasurer would report to the fiscal officer so that this would be a more consolidated approach. But I do agree that we would want to have this formalized because this is how we've built the budget. And last year we were operating under a budget with an auditor and a recorder, and it was very difficult at times because we were consolidated. We don't have a county recorder anymore or that type of office. So we do need to take care of this along with the budget.
Right, yeah, Mr. Chair, I completely agree. That's why let's remove any ambiguity. Okay. Formally move what you can. Let's go the charter route. I don't necessarily interpret it that way, but that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. And let's just eliminate any questions whatsoever.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Simon?
I need clarity about what Mr. Councilman Greenspan wants moved other than what's on the chart. What formal procedure are you looking at other than a charter amendment?
Sure, thank you. Mr. Chair, to Councilmember Simon, the issue of formally, as we set up, as we've done in other departments where they've come before us and structured themselves, these two right now, the Office of Budget Management, Office of Procurement and Diversity, are not formally constituted under the fiscal officer, even though operationally it makes, I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying let's go through the protocol of making sure that it's all buttoned down and there are no questions or concerns whatsoever.
So through the chair to Councilman Greenspan, you don't have an objection necessarily to the organizational chart that we're looking at, but we do need to set it up through our council process to establish the department as set forth here.
Absolutely. Okay. And as a financial officer, this is how, if you're asking how I would have set it up, I just want to make sure we do go through the proper steps.
Okay.
That's my only point.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Jones.
Through the chair to Mr. Steen. Back in January, there was discussion about a people's budget. These budgets obviously are very complex, and we're all trying to wrap our minds around them, at least I am. And there was some discussion about just some of the major or financial information points in this with our county budget that the people could grasp. Was there any follow-up to that? Or was that before you got here? Well, it certainly was before you got here, but was it ever brought to you?
To the council member, through the chair, thank you for the question. Actually, we have thought about this. That was before I got here, but the hope for the county this year is you prepare what's called a comprehensive annual financial report and submit that to the Government Finance Officers Association to determine whether or not it meets their reporting criteria, if it receives excellence in financial reporting. Many of you are familiar with this from your cities. Another part of that is the popular annual financial report, which takes that CAFR and summarizes that down so that you can distribute that to the public and they can see your results. The same opportunity holds true. We're planning on presenting our 2-year budget, the first county in the state of Ohio to submit a biennial budget to the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Competition. It's our hope, and I believe it will be awarded the certificate for excellence in budgeting. It goes a long way toward helping with what I would call credibility to the taxpayers, credibility to the rating agencies. The next step to that, then at the close, is that you take that document, same step, you boil that down to about a 2-page summary of what the budget is and what we're doing, initiatives, where dollars come from, where dollars go, and distribute that to the public. And so that would be our plan. That's our plan as we lay it out. Once the budget's approved and we get the GFOA document ready, we come up with a budget that we can submit out to the public that's summarized or simplified. I don't want to say simplified that they can't understand it. We just want to make it easy that they can grasp it in 2 pages versus the big book that we all have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll
Mark, are you
hear
ready?
from Mark Parks. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and other esteemed council members. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present the budget to you this morning. And here we go. And we briefly spoke about the consolidation of the organization, where we came from 4 elected official offices and 3 different departments, where we're pulling that all together. Just to briefly talk about some of the efficiencies that are gained through that process. If you understand the 4 elected officials, which were the recorder, the auditor, treasurer, and clerk of courts, were each an autonomous body in and of itself. So they each had HR, they each had chiefs of staff, executive staff, IT, as well as a number of clerical staff. So what we've been working through this year is consolidating that and eliminating the redundancies. If you look at the book, and actually our budget is on page V110, and I would just want to point you down to the mission statement, where we say that we want to consolidate the diverse financial functions of a governmental entity, including property tax assessment, tax collection, budgeting, general accounting, cash management, consumer services, and purchasing into one enterprise that will serve as a model for all other counties while realizing efficiencies gained from the consolidation and offering superior service. So with that being said, and you see all those categories there, to Ms. Councilman Jones's point, this can't be real simple, but I'm going to try to really break it down so that it makes sense going through this process. So the first thing I want to point you to is the chart at the top of our budget, where you see it broken down. You see the general fund, other funds, and all funds with the FTEs, the chart at the top. That is the rolled up consolidation of all the departments that are in the fiscal office. And if you look at that, if you look at what we have projected for 2011, we're at $45.9 million. Go a little over and look at the 2012 number, it's down to 43.5. So in the consolidation in the first year, we're recognizing $2.3 million in savings just by eliminating some of the redundancies that have been addressed thus far. If you take it out one more year, you will see another $781,000 in savings based on eliminating some of those redundancies and also right-sizing the fiscal office. So that is the very consolidated portion of the fiscal office budget, which shows all of the departments that we named in a consolidated form. Going a little further over, we talked about the staff reduction. If you look at our where it says key performance measures, you see where we've had significant changes in staff, where we've reduced our numbers, and the fiscal office maintains that we will be a model for the county in being efficient. So we've eliminated quite a few numbers, and our charge is to still offer great service even though we're cutting significantly. The other thing that we have proposed is that we will reduce our tax delinquencies in the performance measures, which will bring more revenues into the office and also increase our bond rating. So those factors alone will increase revenues into the county, which is certainly one of the goals that we have. If you turn to page V112, and you see the funding sources, these are the funding sources that come through the fiscal office. Real estate assessment is from the real estate taxes that come in. We get a percentage of that. For delinquent real estate taxes, we get a percentage of the monies that we collect as well. And then we have the tax prepayment special interest. That is when people prepay their taxes, there's interest associated with the money sitting there, where we get dollars from that. The tax certificate administration, that's the tax lien sale that we spoke about earlier. And then we have the land bank and the title administration, which gains their revenues through the sales of the processing of auto titles. Now, one thing that I will say, if you look up at the top, you see that general fund dollar amount. The fiscal office generates actually more revenues than they are able to keep. We balanced out our budget by saying that 18 million is our general fund funding, but actually we bring in about $14 million in investment dollars. We also bring in about $3.7 million from the recorder's office as well. So what we bring in exceeds what we use, but by it being general fund dollars, it just goes all into that pot. So I just want to point that out, that we do generate some dollars as well. If you look down to the other chart where it talks about the staffing levels, and we did talk about that, and Mr. Steen talked about that as well, you see where we went from 543 staff in 2009 all the way down to 344 projected, with $3.5 million savings just from 11 to 12. But the significant point is the pre-charter number was almost 200 more employees, and we will be able to operate as efficiently and effectively with that many fewer individuals. So that's just giving you an idea of the efficiencies gained through the charter. So those are some of the summary points that I wanted to point out. And now I'd like to move on to a little more detail. And I'm taking you to Appendix A2. It's Appendix A-2, and it's near maybe the 2/3 of the book.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Through the chair, to Mr. Parks. The 344 projected budgeted FTEs for 2012, well, are those fired? Were those people being let go? Were some transferred to other departments? Were they made part-time? What describe that? Qualify that.
To the
reduction?
chair, to Councilman Jones, there's a couple of situations. There are some layoffs that are well known that are planned. There's also attrition, retirements, and just people who resign. So that number includes all of that. Okay.
Were any moved to other departments?
There, for us, again, through the chair to the councilman, for us, if they move to another department, that would be effectively a resignation. You're not saying within our division, right? You're talking about.
Actually, I was thinking of IT. I thought that in IT there were some who were moving from IT to another department.
Okay,
So
you are correct. There's actually consolidations with HR, so all of the HR people will now be reporting to HR, and IT as well will be going to the IT department, so it does include some of that as well. Okay. All right, so we are at Appendix A2, and near the bottom of the page you see where it says Fiscal Office, County Fiscal Office. I'm just going to walk you through to show you the different divisions of the Fiscal Office and their individual budgets. The first one you see is the Fiscal Office Administration, which includes Mr. Steen, myself, and a few other administrative staff. And for that budget, basically, you just see personnel expenses and a few capital items. Moving on, you see the Office of Budget and Management. Again, and I will say that the fiscal budgets are pretty basic. Most of them include the personnel expenses, some contracts, which typically are maintenance contracts for our computer systems, and some other expenses like supplies, etc. So the Office of Budget and Management, again, very basic. You see the personnel, and then you see the contracts at $20,967, which includes the contract for the cost allocation plan, as well as a computer maintenance fee contract. Other operating and supplies, training, etc. Moving on, we go down to financial reporting, which is at the top of the next page, and that is what was formerly general accounting. Again, we have the personnel, and then the contracts. Primarily, one of the big costs in the contract line item is $600,000 for the external audit that we pay to the state of Ohio to do the financial audit of the books. The rest in that area is for maintenance contracts for the different financial systems in the general accounting area, financial reporting. As far as other operating, you see a pretty significant number there. That is advertising. We have to advertise the tax delinquencies as well as print them and send them out. And we had $172,000 for our postage for that particular item, as it kind of relates to some of the conversation that's been going on. So the total cost just for advertising delinquent taxpayers, printing it, and the postage is almost $1 million. Okay. Moving down to property valuation, again, we have the personnel. Now, if you look at this book, you see property valuation here, and then the second to the bottom, you see tax assessment. We have split some of the costs for the sexennial reappraisal in these two areas. So the costs are separated. So when you see the $1.6 million, 1.2 of that will apply to the appraisal contract. And then there's $325,000 that we are appropriating for our financial system. We also have $652,000, which is going to be a cash transfer for the GIS system. The auditors or former auditors department has always kicked in for GIS, and that's where those dollars will be coming from. And additional $250,000 for postage for our assessment. Once we come up with the valuations, there will be a mass mailing to show the values of the property. The next section after property evaluation, you'll see records and license, which was primarily formerly the recorder's office. And again, we have the personnel costs, some supplies, and then we have the contracts are primarily just the maintenance contracts for the computer systems and the recording, formerly recorder's office. The next category, excuse me, is the Title Bureau. And the Title Bureau's primary...
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Brady would like to ask a question about this specific category.
Again, under operations, records and licenses, what I'd asked before, where we could find, and this may not be the right time to ask this question, and if so, just let me know that. But I was told that estate taxes is under records and licenses, and I can't tell by looking at this anything about the estate tax department or the previous state tax department. Where would I be able to, in this document, to find out what we bring in estate taxes? I know that this is a budget, but I'm still looking for estate taxes.
Through the chair to the Councilman Brady, you're looking for the revenues from estate taxes?
Yes.
Okay. The revenues for estate taxes would actually go into, those go back out to the cities. So it would fall in this category, but in this budget, this particular section here, this is just showing the expenditure side of the budget. So the revenues are not showing up here.
Okay, all right. What about weights and measures?
Weights and measures is...
We bring in fees from weights and measures now, but there we also have a staff and expenditures where...
Through the chair to the councilman, those are also under that same area, under the operations and license. That's correct.
Right.
And there is no, unfortunately, the FTEs, because of the way it's broken down, I just happen to know that there's 7 people in weights and measures, and there's like 2 in estate taxes, but they're not broken down individually because it's rolled up into this new structure.
2 people in estate taxes?
That's correct.
Does that include the person who goes out and inspects the, what do you call them, the lock boxes?
Yes, it does.
To the council member through the chair, if I can, if you would like, we can get a detailed breakdown of all the revenues that come in. I know that this was just provided at a summary level. If that would be helpful to the council, we would be glad to detail all the revenues we get, all the sources. That's not hard to do.
Mr. Director, could you just bring us back a summary of the staffing for the estate tax section and the weights and measures section? How many people and what the expense is, and also how much is collected on estate tax and how much is collected on fees for weights and measures?
To the chairman.
Does that get to what you're looking for?
Yes, and I've had some correspondence with Mr. Steen, but just to follow up since Mr. Steen stood up, small item, but it's my understanding that in the past that the county auditor actually received, the elected county auditor actually received a separate check, personal check, percentage of the estate taxes. I assume that has been changed under the new charter, but I was wondering if you might know about that one little strange little nuance about county government that most people have never heard of.
To the council member through the chair, no, you're correct, and actually it is a nuance. Since I serve in the function as the county auditor, they've handed me a couple of $225 checks. It's a monthly fee that you get to collect estate tax, and so that's rolled into compensation. That
So you're still receiving that?
by statute, yeah, that goes to the person charged with the duty of processing the estate tax, which since the auditor is part of the fiscal office, that rolls to me. So yes, I do receive a $225 check at the end of each month.
Certainly not personal to you, but I think that's sort of an antiquated structure. You can imagine when some very, very wealthy estate, finishes out their business, so to speak, in some of these counties. County auditors, were county auditors that were in line for significant personal checks, and I don't think anybody knows anything about that, and I think maybe we should, look into it. I don't want to
the council member's
mess
correct.
with your business, but
No, and at one point, to the council member through the chair, county auditors did get compensated to the tune of about $18,000 per year.
Okay, so I may be talking about
yeah. Back in the old days,
something
that was the hidden way to compensate county auditors, and through their lobby in Columbus, they had that inserted into state legislation.
And that changed, did it?
That did change. Now it's just
Okay.
a very nominal fee, and I can assure you.
When did that happen then? I'm glad. I'm interested in.
I have not worked in an auditor's office
Okay.
since '88.
Okay, well, I know it was still in place 30 years ago.
Yeah, I was surprised, and rest assured, I didn't make or break my decision on the $225 that I found out that I
really?
received.
Well, you can pay your parking.
But I do appreciate it, I guess. I guess one last question, I'm going to let Mr. Parks finish. We ask about the staffing, we can get all that in the revenues. This, I want to be clear though, is that the staffing that we have today, or the staffing that you're going to see in some of those departments once we finish our downsizing?
I would say both. I mean,
Okay.
Both.
Because
Okay.
the size of the departments, I can tell you safely, it's not going to be that size when we're done.
Thank you.
Director, and this would be generally for the administration, whenever any information is requested, I would ask if you could forward that information to our budget person, Trevor.
Yes, Mr.
And he can then forward it to the council. Okay.
Absolutely,
So
Mr. Chair. We'll get that today.
Use Trevor as our point of contact for that. Okay. Mr. Parks.
Okay, we left off at the records and license, I believe, and Again, basically.
Sorry, what page was?
We are on Appendix A-3. In the middle of the page, Operations, Records, and License. They have a $4 million budget. Again, that includes the former Recorder's Office primarily and the Microfilm Center. And basically the contracts are just maintenance contracts on the different scanning equipment, et cetera. Moving down to the Operations and Title Bureau, we have the personnel. Commodities would be the papers and the different forms. And their contracts are primarily the leases for the 3 satellite offices that we have. We have Parma, North Olmsted, and Southgate. So that's represented in that contract amount. And then, as I mentioned, moving further down to tax assessment, that is a division of what used to be our appraisal department. And you see the contracts are related to the Saxennial reappraisal, dollars for the MVP system. We need a tax system, so we are starting to appropriate dollars to pay for that. And then the rest would go towards the maintenance contracts. And with that, well, I'm sorry, I'll go down. If you turn to Appendix 4A, the next page, I'll just go down to the bottom where you see the Office of Procurement and Diversity. We have our personnel cost, and then the contracts are primarily what is known as buy speed, which is our purchasing system, and maintenance contracts for their different computer items. So as I mentioned, the fiscal office doesn't have a lot of variation. It's pretty much maintenance contracts, and for some areas we have postage, printing, and advertising for the public's purpose for sending out of our bills and notices. With that, I will bring up Mr. Richard Sensenbrenner, and he'll talk to you about the treasury items.
Mr. Chair,
Okay. Councilman Germano.
before we go to Treasury, yesterday it was brought up that there's the new internal audit department. And I'm just wondering, part of that expense of that internal audit department, is that going to help reduce the charges that the audit would cost because we're already internally auditing, and where do we find that?
To the councilman through the chair, that would be the hope. It's called for in the charter, so it's being established. The way, at least I envision it working, is taking a look at all of our cash controls, our processes, procedures. The county actually has this right in that your internal auditor, as they're doing their test of systems, test of transactions throughout the county to make us operate better, if they uncover fraud, if they uncover something that's illegal, you have an inspector general. That's where that should go. Most governments have an internal auditor that tries to do both. And a good internal auditor, and the one we're recommending has over 20 years of audit experience, isn't trained to do fraud and illegal activity. They're trained to look at systems, and they're trained to look at transactions. The direct answer, we would hope it would reduce our costs, but we're kind of at the mercy of the state auditor. The state auditor sets the fee for the audit. As mentioned earlier, it's about $600,000, which is less than we paid the private firm. But if Auditor Yost raised that next year to $650,000, we really have no recourse. By state law, they come in and audit you, and you pay the fee they charge you. But we would hope it would help us save money through improved processes. The budget that you see, and I know I'm rambling, that's a placeholder budget that I put in so that the new director, when they came in, would have something in place. And that was based on consultation. The audit committee, and President Conley's on the audit committee, knows that we've been talking about just having something in place until we get that set up.
Thank you.
Director, before we proceed to the treasurer's office, there were 3 items on the schedule that we haven't heard much about yet, and perhaps at this time you might want to talk about them. And those are the capital improvements plan, the debt service, and the county budget commission.
Mr. Chairman, the capital improvement plan and the debt service are going to be handled by Budget Director Rubino after Treasurer Sensenbrenner. We've kind of laid it out in that format. And you said the Budget Commission is incorporated into our budget. It's already part of that consolidated number. So we've gone through it, and again, there's a certain number of people budgeted in the Budget Commission. As we blend that in with general accounting, that number will probably change.
And could you explain just a little bit of what the Budget Commission does?
In terms of here, Budget Commission is the body that when we allocate all of our tax revenues out to the political subdivisions, that's your interface with your political subdivisions. When we do the settlement, they're the group that handles that settlement.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Question.
Councilman Greenspan.
Internal audit, that's a separate section will be discussed later, correct? I know Mr. Germana mentioned it. There will be a separate presentation.
Correct, Council Member, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Treasurer Sensenbrenner, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, council members. My name is Rich Sensenbrenner, Treasurer for Cuyahoga County. As most of you know, the basic fundamental duties of the Treasury Office is threefold. One, to collect the taxes. Two, to invest the funds. And then three, to pay out the funds, but only upon the presentation of a warrant from the county auditor. I'm going to continue on with what Mark Parks was doing. And so if you'll just flip the page to Appendix A4, and I'm just going to go through this page. Basically, the Treasurer's Office is comprised of this page, most of the page of Appendix A4. As you can see, the Treasurer's Office comes out of 5 funds. And you'll see the funds here as the general fund, the DTAC fund, or delinquent tax fund, the prepayment fund, the tax certificate fund, and then last but certainly not least is what we'd refer to as the Land Bank Fund or the County Land Reutilization Corporation Fund. I want to go through and first just talk about staffing, then I'll talk about the other sections like commodities and controlled services, contracts, and other operating and capital outlays. So that's the format I'll follow. The entire budget for the Treasury among all 5 funds is $11.4 million. Now, as council knows, $6 million of that is directly targeted toward the land bank. So in all reality, in terms of the actual day-to-day operations we do, it's more $5.4 million. When we look at the staffing of the Treasurer's Office, as you can see in these line items, as Mark's pointed out, staffing basically consists of the first 2 lines in each fund. The personnel services and, of course, the benefits, which are a direct formula relating to the personnel services or the salaries. In the Treasury Office, when you look at all 5 funds, we have $2.7 million for personnel and benefit costs. In the first category, which is entitled Treasury Management, that's the general fund portion of the office. Out of that, for salaries, we have $1.4 million. That basically funds 4 activities in my office. 1 is just the general administration. 2 is investments and cash management. 3 is refunds and remittances. And lastly is data processing and cashiering. Of course, the critical activities there, as I'm sure most of you are aware, are investing the excess cash that we have, but only in eligible investments. We also do the absolute critical step after that is monitor their investments. Basically, all those investments are kept at a safekeeper, or a safekeeper, which is usually a bank or a trust company. And then lastly, of course, just as important, we manage and reconcile each of our bank accounts. The next fund down, the DTAC fund, we have, again, in personnel, just talking personnel, and then I'll come back and hit the other items. We have almost $1 million appropriated for staffing. Again, the folks in that and the DTAC fund primarily consist of staff that's dedicated to taxpayer services, our House Bill 294 processing, and our foreclosure processing. I will just point out that for taxpayer services, those are the folks that assist the taxpayers on a day-to-day basis. Often those folks who fall into delinquency in the county. And they'll often come in, and the main result of that effort is we try to get people onto payment plans, or you could call them contracts, with the county to pay within a certain time period, any of their delinquencies. And of course, they get mainly walk-ups. As you walk through the first floor, you'll often see people in seats, and in certain times of the year, you'll see taxpayers actually streaming out in lines. And of course, during those times of the years, we try to accommodate them the best we can, get them in and get them out as quickly and as customer service oriented as possible. We'll also be inundated with phone calls. We have a fairly good phone answering system where we monitor all the phones coming in, see how long the wait times are. We're right now looking to improve that system. It's not a bad system, but we're looking to improve it. And then, of course, we get emails, and we get a lot of regular mail from taxpayers who are having either questions, but more often trouble paying their taxes. Also, I do want to digress a little bit from personnel, just briefly. Under the DTAC, under other operating, you'll see $103,000 there. And that is dedicated to the foreclosure prevention program. So that's a transfer that goes to the foreclosure prevention fund, grant fund. And that represents a continuing budgetary commitment to that program. Moving down to the next fund, which is the prepayment fund, that's about $193,000 worth of staff salaries and benefits. And as the fund kind of says, that is for people who manage the coupon and ACH prepayments that come in to the county. And that's, of course, what we really try to emphasize and push. Obviously, if we can get people to prepay on a regular schedule, then that twice-a-year hit doesn't seem so bad. And then lastly, where I have staffing, is the fourth fund down, which is the tax certificate fund. And again, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's folks dedicated to our tax certificate cell, which we've had some conversation recently about in terms of the proposed tax lien certificate cell that we're trying to do within the next couple weeks. I want to say it's important, and I wanted to talk about the salaries, because represented in this appropriation presented before you for your consideration is a reduction of personnel and benefit appropriation for the Treasury Office. And this has been alluded to, of course, for many months by the executive, by the fiscal officer, in terms of the effort of reducing headcount or reducing staffing levels and trying to make all these fiscal offices run as efficiently and as lean as possible. We have not yet this time identified specific areas that have been finalized for those reductions, but we have committed to run a leaner office, not only in Treasury, but in all the fiscal offices. I am currently working, of course, with the fiscal office to look for those cost savings that can occur within Treasury. As has been mentioned before, some of those savings could come from consolidation of human resources personnel, overall fiscal office consolidation, like people who are managing the contracts or time and attendance for their area offices, can those be consolidated into one spot, reducing personnel and hopefully running a more efficient office, and just streamlining operations within my office, within Treasury, whether that's just through a reorganization and how we do things and how we manage staff, or through technology improvements, such as looking at items such as lockbox processing of checks and tax bills. So I do want to point out that every single area under Treasury is being examined, and that's all the way from the top, from administration and taxpayer services, prepay, tax certificate, foreclosure processing, and foreclosure prevention. Moving back up to the top and hitting the other line items briefly. Commodities obviously is a very small dollar amount, and it's only about $3,000 for the entire office across all the funds, and that's basically for office supplies.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just wanted to go back when you mentioned consolidation,
Mhm.
and this might not be the question for you, but I'll ask it anyway. Is there any dialogue around collaboration with the city of Cleveland with the weights and measures, since they have a weights and measures also?
To the council member through the committee chair, I can say that's an excellent question. Weights and measures doesn't get processed in my treasury office, so that's probably a question that is good for one of my esteemed colleagues.
Oh,
very good.
To the council member, through the chair, you have a colleague who's been working with us on this, so I don't want to steal their thunder, but we've had conversations about improving the weights and measures operation and expanding its focus, and I think that'll be coming forward at some point.
Brought it up. I'm preparing legislation to be introduced to, and hopefully, and I'll circulate it before it's introduced, to rebrand Weights and Measures as a Consumer Affairs Department. There are areas, this is not an expansion of responsibility. There are areas that are already in state law that have been neglected, in my opinion. And so I've been working with people, folks in the administration, to try to go about that in a way that which won't create a new department, won't create a new bureaucracy. I visited the folks in Summit County. They do a lot of really interesting things. There's a potential of doing things in the future, but I don't want to introduce some very big, complicated bill that calls for a lot of staffing and would probably take us 6 months of hearings to get to the point where we could do something. So I think that's I'm working on it.
Certainly
Councilman,
support you in that.
if I can add, Councilmember Brady, actually, he's being a little modest. He actually ran this area at one point, and so he's reached out to us, and we're excited to be looking at this. And one example would be the implementation of fuel quality testing. While you're at the pumps testing the amount of gas, test the quality, and this county's never done that. All the other large counties do that. It's something that we need to do, and the council member is encouraging and pushing us forward, and we're going to be moving in that direction.
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Simon.
Sure. I do support Councilman Brady. I know the work he's been doing quietly behind the scenes, and want to make sure that what he envisions for this new manifestation of a consumer department perhaps needs. Do you have in this budget at this point what you're going to need to see that happen?
We'll be getting to the bottom of that before the process is over, I'm sure, quite honestly. But yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, but I'm trying to make sure that that's the case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Continuing on.
Please proceed.
Okay. When you go back up to the top again, under contracts and professional services, overall, the entire Treasury, we have about $588,000 for contracts and professional services. You can see $416 in the general fund, $102,000 in the DTAC, $68 in the prepay, and a minor amount, $2,000 in tax certificate. Out of those, I just wanted to give a quick list of the largest contracts that we use on an annual basis for these funds. The largest is our Manatron contract, sometimes referred to as our MVP software, and that's $232,000. Now that's only actually half the cost, because the fiscal office / auditor's office pays the other half of that contract, since we both jointly utilize that system. Of course, the Manatron system is our backbone of our system that we utilize every day, every person in our office, for the tax billing and collection software. Also, works hand in glove with the Manatron system is $72,000 for our Unisys software, or our Unisys system, which is really a couple really big machines we have in the basement where we process all the checks and tax bills, and it interfaces with the Manatron system. We have a couple investment contracts with PMF, who provide investment consultant services for about $52,000 a year, and with Bloomberg services for their monitor systems, where we track daily activity of the yield curve, and that's $25,000. So that's investment software, and of course that also gives us instantaneous pricing of our portfolio. So we can price it any day, and also critically at month end, and more importantly for year end for financial reporting purposes. We also have $50,000 for Midwest, a company named Midwest, who does our printing and mailing contracts for all our tax bills. And then we have just a number of small software contracts. Thank you, Nikki. So that concludes contracts and professional services. Again, kind of moving back up to the top again, so to say, and down in order. Our controlled services was talked about yesterday. That's internal service. It's about $1 million of our office, and that's the internal service bills we get for data communication, the telecommunication services, and for space. The next line down is other operating. And again, this is a little different for each fund, so I'll go through each fund. But in the general fund, we have $314,000, and that is primarily postage. So we have two huge tax bills that go out every year, probably half a million letters that go out just in those two billings. In the DTAC, we have, as I talked about earlier, in the other operating $103,000, and again, that's the transfer to support the foreclosure prevention program. In the tax prepay fund, in other operating, $310,000, and that's primarily to pay the interest amount that's to be applied back to taxpayers who participate in the prepay program, the ACH prepay program, which is allowed by our revised code. It's obviously the incentive to get people to prepay. And then lastly, the tax certificate fund, $331,000, and that is, again, primarily for the two advertisements that would be in the plain dealer if we do a public auction sale for tax lien certificate sale. So again, that's the bulk of our day-to-day activities that you see there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the last fund is a relatively straightforward fund, which Council's well aware of, which is our commitment to the land bank of $6 million, which is appropriated. And so that concludes an overview of the operations of Treasury and the appropriations being proposed to Council for Treasury. I'd be glad to answer any questions if there are any.
Councilman Conwell, and Schwan Greenspan.
Through the chair to Mr. Sensenbrenner. Okay, could we go back to the advertisement just so I can understand? I guess under the fiscal tax certificate administration, you said those are costs that we pay advertisement to the plain dealer that we have to do? Or?
To the council member through the committee chair, correct. If we do a public auction versus a negotiated sell, if we do what's referred to as a public auction, then we definitely have to advertise those per the Ohio Revised Code in a newspaper of the largest circulation. So it's spelled out who we have to advertise with. And now if we do a negotiated sale, we don't have that step. However, it's somewhat cost neutral, because if we do a public auction, if we do choose to use that method versus a negotiated method, then we can add that cost onto those parcels that are being included in the sale. So it will be cost neutral to the county government. And so if we don't do a public auction and we go negotiated, we won't spend that money, but at the same time, we won't have the revenue coming in to offset it.
Okay, so I guess what I need to get clear in my head is that 331,000 is just primarily for advertisement. It doesn't have anything to do with putting the auction on or anything like that.
To the councilwoman through the chair, that is correct.
So usually, through the chair to Mr. Sensenbrenner, we don't usually use that much money, do we? That's kind of expensive for me for advertising.
Through the chair to the councilwoman, over the last typically over the last 10 years, we've really done, the county government has done a tax lien certificate sale about every year, usually in the spring, but it doesn't have to be in the spring. And the last 2 years, it's been, to my knowledge, it's been a negotiated sale, so they've been able to avoid this cost. But there is a track record of doing both. I mean, there is a track record in county government of doing some public auction sales and some negotiated sales. And there's advantages and disadvantages of each method. Both are allowed in the Ohio Revised Code, and you'll see county governments around the state using both options.
On this point, I'd like to ask the law director if we would have flexibility under home rule on how we would advertise that public auction.
I would have, I'm sorry, I walked in late. I'm not sure exactly. I'll have to look into that, but we have, the general rule is, yes, we have flexibility under home rule for the general contracting issues, which is how we were able to do it under our contracting and purchasing procedures ordinance. However, when it's a specific matter in the revised, like the sheriff's sales or things of that nature that are required by the revised code, we don't have the flexibility to do that. Now, there is, I guess, a movement right now in the Ohio, there is a pending bill in the Ohio legislature to allow it to happen on the county's website. With respect to I think you're talking about the sale of the tax certificates. There is a specific provision in the Ohio Revised Code that details how the treasurer does that. And I think you would go under that. What happens is our local ordinance brings in the approval requirements, which is why it's coming through council instead of the treasurer doing it on his own without the approval. But let's put it this way, this is not one I would want to test home rule on because of the specificity in the Ohio Revised Code, as opposed to the general contracting and the competitive bidding requirements.
Councilman Brady, on this
Just
point.
on this point, there were lively debates 10 years ago about this in the legislature. And the council might be interested in knowing that the folks who came, who were, who the strongest lobby, it shouldn't be a surprise, it's the newspapers themselves, the strongest lobby for changing this law. So this has been considered for quite some time, but the newspapers are pretty, the newspapers seem to have quite a bit of clout in the state legislature.
Okay, Councilwoman Conwell has the floor.
So could you tell me how often, because I'm just trying to wrap my mind around 331,000. So you do it twice a year, but how often in that twice a year are they running this ad like 24/7?
Through the chair to the councilwoman, I would say this. Let me back up a half a second. The sale that is currently in process for this year is a negotiated sale. Okay. So for this year, we won't have this expense for 2011. For 2012, it's in the budget. It doesn't mean we have to do a negotiated sale or a public auction. I mean, that is still a choice that can be made, based upon the situation. So that would be for 2 advertisements as required by ORC. And as council members may know better than I do the price of full-page ads in the plain dealer is quite expensive. But that would really only be for 2 advertisements for however many parcels that are on that tax lien sale. But again, this year, we will have no costs because what's being proposed this year is a negotiated sale. Next year, we're prepared to go either direction. And this year for the negotiated sale, the reason we're doing a negotiated sale is just because we have so much more control. There's been a lot of criticism, and legitimately, of tax lien sales when it's just done kind of bluntly. And so before I even started, Fiscal Officer Wade Steen, of course, has been working diligently with the with folks out in the community that deal with this on a day-to-day basis and see what's happening with foreclosures or working with cities in terms of just getting revenues in. And so it was decided this year to go with a negotiated sale so they could tweak that sale to make sure they were making it as number one, bringing as much money as possible, but number two, make it as positive as possible in terms of ultimately the taxpayer, the parcel owner.
Okay, Ms. Conwell. Okay, Councilman Tran.
Thank you. Mr. Sensenbrenner, you had indicated we're looking at using lockbox, or we are actually going to use lockbox? We're actually...
Through the chair to the council member, we are actively looking at lockbox. We're working with the bank, and my hope and my desire is that we'll have it up and running by collection period in December. I know of nothing right now at this point with the meetings we've had setting this up that is going to cause a problem getting this up and running. But there's obviously due diligence that has to be done, and that's what we're in the middle of doing right now, working with the bank to make sure it can be run effectively, because the last thing we want to have happen is problems with collections. So I want to give a very positive response that we will see this, but we're in the due diligence process right now.
So that'll come before council with a competitive contracting before whereby we're going to see competitive banks putting forth proposals. I'm not sure I understand. I mean, that's how we use a lockbox. I want to identify how you folks use that process.
To the council member through the chair, excellent question. Excellent question. We currently have, I'm going to defer to Wade if he wants to come up here. We currently currently have a contract with Key Bank to provide banking services. Okay, we currently have a contract. I was going to utilize that existing bank contract, which lasts for another year and a half, to pull in lockbox services, since I have a current signed contract with Key Bank for banking services. Now, obviously, I was going to run that through our legal counsel to make sure that all the legal requirements are in place to utilize that service.
Yeah, a lot of times in banking, that's a divisible service, which is priced separately and it's contracted service. So I just didn't know whether the law department feels as though we have to go out and competitively bid the lockbox service.
To the council member through the chair, since, as all of you know, I'm a former county treasurer, and when I first got here, I used to bang my head on the wall every day knowing that we didn't use a lockbox. It's already incorporated into our current banking agreement. So I looked at that. We can merely extend the service. Rich hit the nail on the head. They're going to run tests on December 1, and we hope it's in place. I think you heard in my earlier comments, it's a couple $100,000 a year we'll save just in not having people handle checks, as well as you reduce error. I mean, people handling checks and processing them cause more error. It's just, I don't know any other way to put it than everybody does this, and we should have been doing it.
I'm familiar with the lockbox service, so it's going to save us money, going to save us a couple $100,000. The next question is, does it save then? Obviously, some personnel reductions are directly attributable to the lockbox when it's fully operational.
Through the chair to the council member, that's certainly the desired goal.
And then the next logical step is elimination of lockbox altogether and go electronic. Is that the next generation of where are we looking at going to that next step, and which then even saves another round of costs even from the lockbox side?
That would be correct, sir.
Okay, do we have an expectation of, because that should ripple through into this, I mean, when we're talking about, I see we have our esteemed IT folks in the back, that this is an area where electronic funds transfer is an elimination of an additional chunk of cash that we can save.
To the council member, through the chair, that would be something we would be looking to in the future. Just the process of getting a lockbox in place with all these systems that don't connect, it's probably first step. If we can just put a lockbox in place, make sure that that's stable and works, then we would start looking down the road. But I don't want to mislead. That's not something you would see in the next 2 years. And we were crawling on the ground in terms of tax processing. We just want to stand upright and start moving forward before we try to run. So we've got to get up, and then we can start moving.
But I would think your business community is ready to do that right today. I mean, they're fully operational. They're used to electronic funds transfers, and that's standard norm. Actually, you slow the process down by doing lockbox a little bit for them.
For them, yes.
Okay. Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question on the land bank on Appendix A4. I see the $6 million. Is that number doesn't? Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. That number doesn't coincide with the land bank numbers. Their DTAN numbers correlate to. Is this where this is the pass through? Is that what we're showing here? We collect it, we pass it through.
Through the chair, to the council member, yes, that is correct. That, to my understanding, is the cap, that we're talking about in terms of the cap amount that will go to the land bank, basically from the penalties and interest within 120 days after each collection, and then is being considered by council through the additional 5% of delinquent tax collections. So if we go over that amount, then they're capped at $6 million.
Okay, I'm a little confused.
Okay.
The next thing has to do still with the land bank, but with controlled services, and their numbers, I believe Councilman Brady may know. I'm going off the top of my head. They have a couple $100,000 in controlled services. I remember we talked about janitorial services or security services being greater than $3,600. Does that come out in a separate function? I'm a little confused.
Through the chair to the council member, you're referring to the $3,600 here?
Right.
I have to admit, I don't have an answer for the $3,600. Do you? Okay, thanks.
To the council member, through the chair, that's our controlled services. We figure someone's got to sit in a desk and process that. And so as you've all heard about this chargeback, the land bank gets charged back a little bit of money so someone can process their transaction, and that's $3,600. So that's our chargeback.
Okay. Thank you on that. I still am going to look at that, the 5.996 million. Because I don't recall seeing that. Their number I remember seeing was 6.3 in the first year and 6.4 in the second year of their DTAN allocation. So I'm just confused about that.
That's just a budget number. That's 6 months of budget.
But they've exceeded in the last 2 years, in 09 and 2010. So I'm just curious if that number's low, is where I'm going with that. And the other point, going back to my original statement regarding the structure of the fiscal office, I looked at the charter again, and I agree with the structure. I have no issues with it, but I do believe the treasurer's office should be a separate department and not currently folded under the fiscal office, at least for budget, well, not at least, including budget purposes. I don't think the interpretation is accurate from a charter perspective. So I would recommend the amendment process is the way to go, but start it. But at the same time, until that happens, we have to abide by the charter, which has, my interpretation, the treasurer being a direct report to the executive, not the fiscal officer. And we would need a separate line item in the budget for the treasurer. The other is OMB and procurement diversity. That, to me, we can do that legislatively within our own body without a charter amendment. It's a lot easier. Once again, I agree with the concept of the design. There are just certain things we've got to go through to solidify the organizational structure.
Okay.
Thank
Please
you, Mr.
continue.
Chair.
Any more? Any more? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn the podium over to Marty Murphy with the Board of Revision, or to Wade.
Did you want internal audit or CIP
Oh.
data first?
Let's go to Board of Revision.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. Marty Murphy for the Board of Revision. As you're aware, the Board of Revision is mandated by Ohio Revised Code to determine the fair value of property in Cuyahoga County. What I will be doing this morning is a little bit different. Rather than going through a ton of numbers, we will talk about the numbers, but I'd like to spend this time talking a little bit about where we were, where we are, where we're projecting to be, and then a little bit about how we compare to other major counties in the state. I believe each of you have a handout. The first chart describes the number of complaints as of October 1st in front of the Board of Revision. There, on October 1st, were 197 2008 complaints, 1,676 2009, and 7,244 2010. Our total amount at that point is represented by the green line, which amounted to 9,117. Today, I can comfortably say that we are well below the mid 8,500 number. I should have the exact number when I get back to the office. If one were to look at where we were on February 14th, when the first board was constituted, and compare that to presently, the October 1st number, when the new board started, February 14th, we had a total of 22,366 complaints backlogged for the board. Today, as I said, that we're running probably in the just under the mid 8,500 number. So there have been over 15,000 complaints completed to date by the boards of revision. If you look at those numbers, and this next chart gives you a little bit of history with the boards of revision. If you see 2003 to 2007, the highest number that the board ever received was the Sextennial Update 2006, where it was under 12,000 complaints received. In 2008, we jumped up to 25,961. 2009, 20,424. 2010, 15,337. I'm projecting right now for 2011, 14,500, and another spike in 2012 after the next update is completed, where we should be again in the low mid 20,000s. I'm looking at 23,000 for the purposes of budgeting and anticipating where we need to be. If we look at our numbers compared with comparable counties, you can see that in 2008, Cuyahoga County far and away exceeded Franklin, Hamilton, Montgomery, or Summit. In fact, Cuyahoga County had more complaints than those four counties combined in 2008. The same is true for 2009, where Cuyahoga County had more complaints combined than those four counties. In 2010, with Franklin climbing, we did not, but we had far more than the counties individually. An interesting note, and when we look at the backlog that the board inherited and where we were at the beginning of the year compared to now, in 2008, when we were running 25,000 plus cases, there were 3 operating boards of revision. The other counties, which collectively had less than us, had 7 operating boards. In 2009, again, we moved it up around September to around 5 operating boards, but we ran most of the year with 3 boards where the other counties had 7. This is the first year where we've actually had a comparable number of boards to the other counties. And interesting of note, Franklin is anticipating going up 1 more board next year. I don't anticipate that we will have to do that. So it kind of gives a perspective as to how we got into the trouble we did and where the other counties are and how we rank compared to them relative to filings and staffing. As Mr. Steen has indicated, the board is fully staffed at this point in time. We have, and there's again on the budget, there's the rounding errors with FTEs and hours. We actually are projecting it's 42 FTEs for 2012. We have 3 staff that were on loan that worked 32-hour weeks that are moving back to their respective old positions. Those positions have all been filled. In terms of our budget, the board has a budget in 2011 estimated at the approved or the recommended amount is $3,667,972,000. The board is 100% funded out of the real estate assessment fund. That was a change in 2011. Historically, the board had been funded out of multiple different sources of funds from the auditor's office, the treasurer's office, the commissioners, and so forth. So the board is operating as a cost center. We're able to manage and measure our costs. In 2013, we're looking at nominal increases, and that's around the contract line item. If you look at the board's total budget, roughly 75% of our budget is for salaries and fringes. The balance of the budget, so a very nominal amount goes to supplies and travel. The biggest bulk of the budget that is not chargebacks for information technology or space maintenance is for postage. Ballpark, for every 20,000 complaints we have, we run around 250,000 in certified mail as required by law. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions regarding the Board of Revision budget?
Mr. Chair, just a
Mr. Schrein.
Thank you. I'm looking at the organizational chart of the fiscal office and see that the Board of Revision is not below the fiscal officer, it's actually parallel to it. So do you see yourself having a direct reporting to the executive, or do you consider yourself a separate body, not answerable to anyone other than the Board of Revision?
I report to Mr. Steen.
Okay. 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 There
Councilman Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the same question I asked Mr. Steen. There was another panel that I think was always alluded to being created. What's the status now that we have the administrator here?
Thank you. We are looking at that additional panel. We have spoke with Mr. Boyle from the administrator's office about how that may happen. We've also been in discussion with Mr. Nani. The law department is also involved. There's a dialogue as to whether it's necessary to actually convene an individual panel that may or may not get some minor remuneration, or can we possibly utilize a panel from an adjacent county, one of their boards, to meet that function.
But we're now 9 months into this, and we have the other panels fired off, and just this one looks like hasn't been solved as far as whether it's legal to use a panel from another county or whatever the status is and all that. Do you know when we're going to have a resolution on this?
I can get back to you on that in the next couple of days, sir.
Okay. Well, it's for every public official.
Sure.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Greenspan.
Actually, Mr. Chair, this isn't a question. There's actually a little bit of praise here to Mr. Murphy. If you could explain as you explained to me earlier, what's going on with the training program and how that's excelled from not having one to where it is today.
At the beginning of the year, as the new panels were coming on, it became clear that there was no training manual. Councilman Greenspan highlighted the need to have some sort of a formalized document and process in place to standardize training for the Board of Revision. Throughout the course of the past several months, we've taken that a step further, and in terms of looking at a standard of training and credibility, we have a process in place where we have now got the training, and because of the linkages with the Ohio Revised Code, the requirements under law, we now have CEUs available for Board of Revision training. They're actually CLEs, continuing law education hours available for Board of Revision training. The process at this point is we pay $25 30 days before the training takes place, give the number of people that will be involved in the training, and we can then provide a certified at a CLE level process for anybody interested in receiving that training.
And thank you. And I think it's important to note that, you know, if we look at what's gone on here prior to us taking office, especially with the Board of Revisions and where we've come with Mr. Murphy taking the charge to go from probably one of the most dysfunctional boards of revisions in the state to now having the only state training manual that I'm aware of, and now to have the Ohio Bar sign off on it, that our training program can qualify for credits, for CLE credits, I think is a testament to the work that the county has done to turn around its perception as it related to this matter. And further to that, we're looking even higher to the state to have our program become the model program for all boards of revisions in all 88 counties. So we're still working on that, but I think it's a great turnaround story for what this county has done in that area. So I just want to draw attention to where credit is due. Thank you.
Okay. Else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now go to either capital improvements or internal audit at the director's discretion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go to internal audit because hopefully this will be brief. If you, in your book, the internal audit department is under Roman numeral 6-30. And as a quick reminder, the audit committee is created in the charter. The members, the statutory members, are the county executive, the president of council, and the fiscal officer, and then 2 citizens. The internal audit committee is charged with hiring the director of internal audit, and then that director is charged with fulfilling the staff. Council's responsibility is to fund the function. As I mentioned, at this point, we have a finalist now, and the hope is to have that person in place. You can see when we, at the top, we thought there may be 2 FTEs in 2011. We hope now to at least have the director on board. But by 2012 and 13, we've budgeted for a complement of 4 staff. The one paragraph, it says the internal audit, the Department of Internal Audit is expected to become staffed with 4 employees by the beginning of 2012. That will probably not happen. If you go to the back of your book, I'm on Appendix A, page 34. I'll wait till you get there. And that details the budget, and I can at least tell you how I came up with the numbers. But if everybody's at Appendix A-34, you see personnel costs of $240,615. Having worked in public accounting, I was just envisioning a department with a director that approximates $90,000, a senior auditor that approximates $70,000, and 2 staff auditors that approximate $40,000. No real magic. That gets you to about $240,000. But that would be subject to the director working with the audit committee on establishing that. But that was what we put in as a placeholder. Personnel costs are just based off 4 people. And as I looked at this, I know conversations have come up about controlled services, and I'm sure the new director of internal audit will feel your pain, because when his biggest expense or her biggest expense is controlled services, I saw exactly what you're talking about. But that was based, again, upon what we assumed the square footage for this function to be. It's merely a chargeback. in capital outlays, we were putting in some money in case we needed to buy laptop computers. If they were out in certain departments auditing and they couldn't take their computer with them, more than likely they're going to want some kind of mobile computer so that they can perform tasks on site. That, quite simply, is the construct of the budget, just to put it in place until the director is selected.
Mr. Director, how can the controlled services be $286,000 for a 4-person office, and the controlled services for the Inspector General are pegged at $20,000? I mean, I just don't understand the huge differences. I have no idea how this is calculated.
It's calculated on square footage. I can talk to the Inspector General because I asked that question after I talked with the Inspector General about her space. She currently has about the same square footage as the Office of Budget and Management, although OBM has more employees. So when you think about space, it's not just the 4 people and where they sit. If there's a conference area, if there's an entry area, and actually some space right now that is being allocated to the Inspector General, I do not believe is being used by her. Where her office is physically located, there's some what I would call unused space by her. But Mr. Chairman, that was charged directly to her. This was based upon what they assumed the square footage of the space for the Internal Audit Department would be. I'm not saying that I believe it's accurate, but it's merely a charge of all those costs. Director Rubino yesterday talked about how we accumulate all those costs, just charge those out. So I would have to pull the exact square footage they used to charge this, but it does seem high, absolutely.
Director, I would like the specific documentation on the $286,000.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll get that for you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you. More under the initiatives, I just want us to be clear because somebody may pick this up. The initiatives itself, I believe, are inconsistent with the charter definitions for this office. I just want, from a consistency perspective, to be clear that if there are initiatives in here, and this just kind of explains what the internal audit function is. For example, at the end of the second sentence, and I'm trying to find it exactly in the charter, but the County Audit Committee conducts financial and performance audits of the county departments, and in the charter it says being audited. It's a minor clarification, but the expectation here, if somebody reads it, is if a department's not being audited, the audit function, the internal audit function should apply. It's just a clarification. And then further, the last 2 other comments, the Department of Internal Audit will focus on financial controls and reporting. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, you're talking about creating, evaluating, compliance, review, recommendations. Is that what we're talking about? We're talking about financial controls, because I assume now, if there hasn't been an internal auditor, that the creation, evaluating compliance really isn't in place. That's not mandated by charter, but is that what we're talking about?
To the council member through the chair, I'm one member of the audit committee. This is how I envision it, as we're consolidating cash collections. And I view that as one of the greatest areas of risk in government is the handling of cash. I would ask the director of internal audit to go out and review all of our cash handling procedures at all of our locations. That would be one of the things we envision. One of the other things I would envision is how we process transactions now that we've consolidated the recorder and the auditor function. So it would be a test of transactions at times, a test of processes, just to make sure that everything, all of our controls are functioning. One of the things that came up in the interviews, though, from a couple of the candidates, which was very good, is that they would want a charter of what this audit committee and internal auditor is to do, and then they would come back to us with their plan, and the committee then would meet with them periodically to make sure that the plan is being followed. But those would be my suggestions to the plan.
Okay. And then you're on that committee, so you could steer that conversation. The last statement has to do with the last words in that initiative, and identification of possible fraud. I've never done an internal audit. I've done independent audits, and I know we try to shy away from acknowledging that we're going to try to identify fraud, because if we miss it, then the exposure is tremendous. Is that a line just in this definition, once again, from an exposure perspective, we may want to remove after the last comma? Because if you miss it and it's discovered, does the county then have liability? Because it's stated here as initiative to do that.
To the council member through the chair, thank you for asking. I can speak directly to that. I asked that be inserted because fraud and theft have been an issue here, as all of you know. And so we thought an initiative should be if there's the possibility to identify that. It doesn't mean that's our only focus. And I think since it's an initiative, it doesn't create a liability. But I will follow up with the standards to make sure that the reports we write address that. We are not held accountable for identifying all cases of fraud because we may miss some, and we don't want to be liable if we miss one.
Right,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, that was my point. And then obviously, the communication between the Inspector General is a component here as well. And I don't know, I don't see that listed here, but it very well may be an initiative as well.
It has to be. Yes, you're correct. We missed that then. If it's not, that's the role.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Germana.
To that point, with the Inspector General, the internal audit, are they going to, the Inspector General going to be using the internal audit for, say, a situation that is brought forward, or is the Inspector General division going to be doing their own audit?
To the council member through the chair, my understanding would be to use that cash handling example again. If the internal auditor identified unreconciled cash, missing cash, something that wasn't operating correctly, I think the direction from that committee should be that then is turned to the Inspector General. Now you're outside your scope to look at theft or loss of funds. That falls to the Inspector General. Whether the Inspector General would request support the other way, I'm not certain. You would have to ask her, but my vision for the Internal Audit Department would be you focus on financial reporting controls, enhancing our processes and procedures. When it gets beyond that scope, you have to defer that or move that to someone who has that authority, which would be the Inspector General.
Director, while we're talking about the $287,000 in control services, I would also like if you could document for us why the Inspector General's controlled services was $149,000 in the 2011 biweekly legislation that we just passed a week or two ago, and why it's only $20,000 in the 2012 proposed budget.
Mr. Chairman, I will get you those answers.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, sorry. Since we're on that same thought, I believe the executive's controlled services was about $200,000 for 15 people, and the internal audit is 200 some odd thousand for 4 people or whatever. So just some sort of an analysis there as well.
Okay. Okay. We'll move on to capital improvements plan. And I would point out that the charter specifically says that the executive shall deliver to the council not only a proposed budget, but also a capital improvements plan. So this is an important charter-related function that we're doing right here.
Good morning, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, Matt Rubino, Office of Budget and Management. What I'm passing out right now is a debt service schedule that ties into the county's annual debt service for next year for general obligation bonds. And then I can speak briefly to the capital improvements plan, specifically the overview that's in the budget document. And then the actual project details and individual capital improvements plan by segment will be part of the budget presentations of the individual agencies that control those projects. I'll go back into that though. The first handout is a debt service schedule for 2012 for our general obligation bonds. These are bonds that were issued for either county projects over the past 15 or 20 years, and also for some other bonds that we issued using our general obligation authority for a few sewer projects that we work collaboratively with some of the local townships. And we also issued bonds for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both in 1993 and starting in 2009, we also issued an additional $10 million in notes that we're carrying right now. But if you look at the bottom of this first page, the budgeted amount for general obligation debt service is that $37.4 million. That ties to the number you'll see in the budget document in the schedules. And that number is comprised of our annual debt service, both principal and interest payments for the GO debt. We have some other bonds. The Rock Hall and the sewer bonds are not paid out of that particular fund, so we back those out. And then we also have on the second page voted jail debt. These are bonds that were approved as part of a voted 0.27 millage of voted taxation for improvements to the county jail back in the early 90s. We have 2 more years of these, and then they term out. It just gives you an idea for our general bonding, what we owe each year on that annual payment of principal and interest. The other bonds related to economic development projects, on the schedules we went through yesterday, those amounts tie to each bond issue. I wanted to present this broken out so you can see that the general obligation debt service is for a collection of outstanding bond issues, not just one series of bonds. And again, for the GO bonds that are for county projects, the funding to pay back these bonds is from the inside millage, the 1.45 that we split between general fund and the debt service fund. For the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, we're using the collections from a 1.5% bed tax that was levied back in 1991 or 92 to fund the construction of the Rock Hall Museum. And subsequently, they've built out leased space at Tri-C for our library and archives. And they approached us in 2009, and we issued an additional $10 million in notes. We assigned the proceeds to the Rock Hall to help provide a funding source for their overall spend on the new archives. And we're now using the collections from the 1.5% bed tax to service the annual payments on those notes also. Those term out in 2015. So we're not using general fund dollars for those. We are using our bonding capacity, though. The last 1, 2, 3 issuances were for sewer projects. And at some point in time, we were approached by a few of the smaller municipalities to, again, use our general obligation bonding authority to issue bonds to provide funding for some sewer line projects. And then we're using assessments to the benefiting property owners to pay the annual debt service on these. But again, we still hold them. They're county debt. They are using our inside capacity to issue GO bonds, and we reflect them on the schedule as part of our overall GO debt. Any questions on the debt service, Mr. Chairman?
Director, on the first page of the handout, why is the $3.762 million in other GO backed out of the LTGO to get the $30,211,000?
That's the amount of debt service that's paid from those other sources. So the Rock Hall, if you total up the Rock Hall bonds and the sewer bonds, those are paid out of other funding sources, the capital projects related to those sewer projects. And then the Rock Hall, we have a separate debt service fund. If you look on Schedule 6, the statement of fund activity, you'll see the line item for the debt service fund. All the revenue comes into that fund. All the debt service is paid out of there. But they're GO bonds. They were issued using the county's general obligation authority. So we show them here, but the expense to pay that annual mortgage payment is not coming out of the debt service fund itself. It's coming from those other sources. In the case of the Rock Hall, it'd be the bed tax.
So the $37,419 is the general fund expenditure?
Correct. The long-term general fund dollars is defined within the inside millage.
Any questions on the capital improvements plan or the debt service?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make one more comment. We have a planned issuance at the end of next year to reimburse ourselves for ongoing capital projects, namely the remaining phase 2 of the juvenile justice complex, which is now complete, and a variety of other smaller projects that have been undertaken over the past 2.5 years. And that's a best practice practice we've used in the past. We come up with planned projects, begin the project work, and then we reimburse ourselves with bond proceeds within the 2.5 to 3 year window we're allowed when we issue tax exempt debt. It's called pay as you go, and that's why we issue bonds roughly every 2.5 to 3 years. So we are due in 2012. The anticipated full year debt service is included in the budget numbers you were provided.
Okay. Thank you very much.
For the capital improvements plan, Mr. Chairman, Section 7 of the budget document provides you an overview. We're going to provide you the project listings this week. But if you go back to Section 7, it's in towards the back of the book before you get to the appendices. I can explain what's there and then what to expect. What we presented is the summary or overview of the proposed capital improvements for the next 5 years. We have 5 project segments. The 2 largest are Road and Bridge and the Sanitary Engineer. And those are projects that are self-funded. The Road and Bridge projects are from a variety of federal and local sources. The Sanitary Engineer, by and large, those projects are funded through revenue received from the districts. And the Department of Public Works oversees the planning and identification of project needs and deciding on when to expend those dollars. The third area or third project segment would be for county buildings and equipment. And those projects are funded by a small amount or usually general fund. The larger amount would be from bond proceeds from some future debt issuance or long-term financing. And we also have a few of those projects that are funded from other sources. So for example, any of the projects identified for the Huntington Park Garage, the annual debt service, or funding the project would come from garage revenue since the garage is operated as an enterprise fund. The other 2 segments, the county airport has an ongoing capital improvements plan mainly for runway and taxiway rehabilitation. They have a pretty substantial plan. A lot of the projects tend to be pushed back into the future years of that CIP, that 2015, 2016 window. What they try to do is get a majority of the funding, 80% or more, from either the Federal Department of Transportation or FAA or the state, with the county providing the additional 10, 15% match to undertake the projects, but the largest of which would be for the runway rehabilitation. They do have some small equipment needs, but most of it is for runway. The last group is for information systems and technology. The largest portion of that 33 or so million that we've proposed or at least are planning on using are for the new real estate property system that's going to be replaced in the next few years. We're also putting in a placeholder or an estimate for what we think the cost may be to replace the county's various information systems for financial reporting and related operations with an enterprise-wide type system. For right now, it's an estimate, and the funding source will be some form of long-term financing, whether it's some form of leasing or technology bonds. It gives you an idea of just with the technology piece, when you're looking at equipment, servers, replacing computers, storage devices, and then of course the 2 large system upgrades, what the potential is for those areas. The next step will be to give you the detailed project listings. We'll give you those this week. The individual agencies that are responsible for managing these projects will go through their segments of the CIP. So for example, Public Works will have 3 of those areas. They'll go over road and bridge projects, sanitary engineer projects, and the county building and equipment projects. The airport will be handled by development. Perhaps the director of the airport will be here for that. And then the Chief Information Officer, Jeff Mowry, can give you some additional information on the proposed investments in technology. And we looked at the areas of technology that would fit into the long-term component of a CIP. There will be other requests for investments in equipment or systems that are not part of the CIP, but we at least wanted to break out the long-term things that have a useful life of more than 5 years as part of the CIP.
Mr. Director, have we identified funding sources for all the items in this plan?
We have proposed funding sources, correct.
Okay.
You'll see that pie chart gives you an idea where the money's coming from. That federal slice is the largest. It's split between the airport and road and bridge. But for every project, there is a anticipated funding source and maybe 1 or more sources. And also the expected expenditures. So if it's a project that begins in 2013, will the project commence in 2013 and continue through 14, or is it all spent in 1 year? That information is all provided in the detailed project listings you'll receive.
I'll ask now if there's questions, but when we receive the detailed list, if we need to come back and ask further questions, we'll be able to do that as well. Any questions about the capital improvements plan at this time? Okay, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now will, is there anything regarding the fiscal office area that we haven't covered, Mr. Director? No, okay. I think that was quite a comprehensive discussion. We will now move on to the last presenter of the morning session, which is our Inspector General, Ms. Nyla Bird, to tell us about the Inspector General's budget for 2012 and 13. Ms. Bird, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. Nyla Bird, Agency of the Inspector General. The Agency of the Inspector General was established in June of 2011 as an independent office to investigate fraud, waste, corruption, abuse, malfeasance, misfeasance, and nonfeasance among county government. Section 2EI of the ordinance set the initial budget for the agency at $375,000, which was for the last half of calendar year 2011, for July 1 through December 31 of 11. During committee hearings, as well as on July 6 of 2011, the Office of the Inspector General submitted its mid-year budget report to County Council. The report contained the information that is delineated in the handout provided to you, and it contained the salaries and benefits, legal research, training of vehicles, transcript and court documents, postage, and print shop. We have provided as well not only the estimates that we provided during the mid-year report, but sort of what we believe the spend will be throughout the remainder of 2011. The biggest differentiation in the spend has to do with the salary and benefits portion, which is a little under $130,000. And that's because of the timing on when staff has been hired throughout the remainder of the year. For the 2012-2013 budget request, we have, I believe it's 7 positions, and they're listed on this sheet that we've provided to you. The salary amounts that are ranges are the same ranges previously provided during the mid-year budget. The 2 changes from the mid-year budget to what we're requesting for next year is the CPA forensic accountant type position. Taking Councilman Jack Schron's advice and talking with the newly hired deputy of the office, we came to the decision that it made more sense both to be fiscally responsive as well as the needs of the office to not engage a full-time staff person at this time to fill that role, but instead to do an independent contractor or contract out on an as-need basis depending on what the investigation called for. There's also included a secretarial position. As you all are aware, we are currently sitting, the agency sits in the former auditor Frank Russo's office area, and when you walk into that office, you are met with a woman who sits there in a receptionist position. That woman is currently part of Wade's team and on his fiscal staff. Wade and I have been in discussions about her and have agreed, and we did previously agree, that she could continue sitting in that space until the classification study and other things with County Council were completed and they determined where she would end up. Wade and I have talked recently about it, and now it's coming to the need of having our own sort of independent Office of the Inspector General secretary person to fill that role. The second subsection on the sheet that we've handed out is investigation resources and staff development. We've outlined the categories and the request for money in that. The Westlaw Next legal research amount. In the mid-year budget, we had requested $10,000 for that. As you can see, for next year, that request has dropped significantly. I think that's due to cost-saving measures we'd realized with partnering with County Council as well as with the law department in providing those services, and there's some other legal research services. There's the same other items that are listed, the fleet vehicles, transcript court documents, training certification, licensure, professional development. The third subcategory is for additional office expenditures. Those include both the postage and the print shop. Then is the next section is the facilities, furniture, equipment, and software section. We've delineated what the Inspector General ordinance says pertaining to that, and I've just pulled out from the information that was presented to you, I believe, yesterday in the executive budget, the numbers associated with those costs. There's also a section included income. Pursuant to Section 32 and 34 of the Ethics Ordinance, all contractors and lobbyists who do business with the county or want to do business with the county have to submit a $100 registration fee to the Office of the Inspector General. We anticipate, and this anticipation is on the low end based on some numbers I recently looked at this morning, that annual income for next year will be at about 30,300 people. I think it's going to be slightly higher than that. We are anticipating by the November 16th that in excess of 400 vendors will be trained to do business in Cuyahoga County and have gone through the mandatory vendor ethics training. So in summary, we provided a summary with the request, which is the salaries and benefits, the investigation resources and staff development, and the additional office expenditures. And that request on the high end comes out a little close to $754,000, which is right in the ballpark of doubling the $375,000 amount that was initially granted to the office for the latter 6 months of the year. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Council President Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, under facilities, furniture, equipment, you have the item for $140,000 for IG office management software. Could you explain that?
I can to a certain degree, and I may ask Wade's office to come in and explain. I believe we are looking for Inspector General software. That number is, in our opinion, extremely high. We don't anticipate that the software amount will be that high. There's someone in my office, the office paralegal, is currently working, I believe, with Jeff Mallory's group to put out an RFP and has told me that that number will be south of $50,000.
So there's some specialized Inspector General software, is that what you said?
And I apologize through the council chair to the councilwoman. Yes, there is. There's specialized Inspector General software that most Inspector General agencies, whether they be federal, local, on the state level, utilize to.
What would it monitor the various departments, or?
What would it do? My understanding, again, through the chairperson to the councilwoman, is that it is a tracking system, so it would keep track of your current investigations, your ongoing investigations, what department you're working through. It would keep track of the secondary employment. It would sort of be one centralized unit to house all of the data that the office is in charge of.
If I can, to the council member through the chair, in addition, it's for separate hardware, separate server, separate everything. The Inspector General is going to be standalone and not be on any county system. So we just ballparked, and that number is high, but we set aside the funds knowing that they wanted to be totally independent so that they would have security. I guess no one can see your data. They're going to work with ISC, and they're going to have their own separate system.
Okay, and then my other question has to do with the professional training of $20,000 for certification, licensure. That seems awfully high.
To the council chair, through the chairwoman, that number, we estimated that number. That was based on sort of benchmarking, looking at certifications. As I think we talked about previously, there's a National Association of Inspector Generals. They do certification for the Inspector Generals, for Deputy Inspector Generals, for investigators. We also put in there continuing education classes, both for investigators and the deputy and myself.
And but what about the $18,000 for fleet vehicles? So involves you using the vehicles that are already owned by the county. This doesn't involve purchase of the vehicle. Is that right?
That is correct. That $18,000, if I may, that $18,000 includes garaging. It's for 2 vehicles. It includes the garaging, the maintenance, the gas, the use of the vehicles that are county-owned vehicles already from the Department of Public Works.
So you request them for whatever days you need vehicles. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions on the Inspector General's budget?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Germana.
Just like I asked before, do you see any cooperation with the Internal Audit Division, or is Inspector General going to be doing their own internal audits?
To the committee chairperson, to the council, through the councilman, I anticipate in the contracting ordinance, there is a section that grants the Inspector General's office the authority to conduct audits and inspect and review contracts. My hope is that we would work collaboratively with the internal audit. I think Director Steen probably said it best, where, and he and I have had brief discussions about this, where if they did find something with fraud, they would turn it over to us. Obviously, we would also seek to utilize them if we had an issue that was out of our area of expertise.
Okay. Councilwoman Conwell's next.
The chair to Ms. Byrd. You talked about a secretary that's sitting outside, and I guess you guys are sharing her right now. Will you consider utilizing her into your organization, or you're just looking for outside staff to come in?
To the councilwoman through the chair, we are not, and if I must have misspoke, we are not currently utilizing her because she is a fiscal office employee. She does sit there, and if someone says, "Can I see the Inspector General?" she may come and tell me, but we are not giving her work or asking her to complete any work for our office. We would anticipate hiring our own person. Quite honestly, she probably makes a little more money than we're willing to pay for that position currently.
My concern is we're laying off so many people. Are we not looking at moving some of these people in our other departments that we're creating?
To the councilwoman through the chair, I believe the position that we have, the range and salary that we have for that position, which I think ranges, if I can find it, it's listed on the sheet. From $26,956 to $32,000. Of course, if anyone that we were laying off wanted to apply and had the requisite skill set, we would interview them and consider them. But I don't know necessarily if we're thinking about just transferring people over from department to department.
So we're supposedly we're posting all positions. Is there some kind of way that we can possibly internally post them? Give people opportunities. Maybe they want to switch. Maybe they know they're not really doing nothing right now. So,
to the councilwoman through the chair, all of the positions in our office have been posted both internally and externally. And in fact, in interviewing for other positions that have been filled, we have gotten internal candidates, and we have interviewed them. And in fact, my deputy inspector general is someone who switched and had an internal job. So that is not out of the realm of possibility.
And I'm not just mentioning it just for your department, for all departments to possibly look at that. And I guess through the chair to Ms. Byrd, I just want to understand how the office works. But I guess my question would be, when you go through your process and you investigate, and I guess not using us as an example, but someone else, what system do we have that we're going to know what waste or, how do we know that? I mean, we don't want to see the plain dealer in our face saying da-da-da-da-da when we're not getting reported what you do. So I'm just wondering, I know you can't report what you find on us, but you know what I'm saying on other things that are going on that we're responsible for. We need some kind of, presentation. It's just, once the investigation's done, I know this can't go on while you're investigating, but have we talked about this in any form or fashion?
To the councilwoman through the chair, according to the Inspector General ordinance, there is a semi-annual reporting where the office has to report out on all of the investigations and things that are complete or pending, etc. Those are due in July and February. This July, we did issue a comprehensive report. I submitted a courtesy copy through, and I apologize, I can't remember if I gave it to the clerk or to the chief of staff, but I know I gave it to one of them to distribute to each of the members on council as well as to the executive, and posted it on the website. It's currently posted on the Inspector General website as well as on the county website. Once the investigations are complete, the plan is to post those on the website as well, not only for your benefit, but for the taxpayers and the community's benefit. The difficulty, as you alluded to, is that so often the investigations take so long to complete. The investigation that was recently reported in the newspaper, we haven't released our full investigation because it's still protected because we've referred it to the prosecutor's office.
Councilman Brady.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, to the IG. Under the expenditures for vehicles, what is it in the nature of the work, I assume, by investigators or whoever? What is the nature, what is the need for a county vehicle to perform their duties as opposed to their own, using their own automobile like almost everyone else?
To the council, to the councilman through the council chair, the need, it was really looked at, Councilman, as a cost savings measure. The investigators, the need for using vehicles is because there are situations where people have reported things to our office and back to me where they've requested that they not come down to the office and meet with me, that they not meet me at a county building, that they meet me, I believe in Councilwoman Connolly's district in Shaker Square at a coffee shop or meet me somewhere else. So there's obviously the commuting back and forth to that location, as well as going out to certain departments to do investigations, as well as possibly traveling other places. So we really tried to, in working with the Director of Public Works and crunching the numbers that it would cost to have access to the pool vehicles compared to reimbursing on the IRS rate, which I believe is close to 50-something cents a mile at this time, that it did come out cheaper to have the two vehicles available to our use.
Well, I'd like to explore that because I think that common sense sort of tells me that I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it in dollars and cents. Why it's more cost efficient to do it one way than the other, because I believe we have other types of inspectors who do use their own vehicles. So if you're right, perhaps we're doing that wrong. It's one way or the other. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, has anyone else signed in for public comment unrelated?
Not that I'm aware of.
Either this was very well planned, or the job took the amount of time allotted. But either way, we're about to go into recess. If there is no objection, I don't see any. We are going to stand in recess until 1 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you very much. We actually have a thing on the schedule.